The radio crackled with static, then silence. Captain Marcus Reed pressed his back against the concrete barrier, dust settling on his uniform like ash from a funeral pyre. 3 clicks north of Kandahar, his convoy had walked into hell. 2 Humvees burning, 6 men down, and Taliban fighters closing from 3 sides like wolves smelling blood. "Overwatch, this is Viper 6, Reed whispered into his headset, watching muzzle flashes dance in the distance. "We are combat ineffective. Request immediate air support." The response came filtered through layers of bureaucracy and distance. "Viper 6, nearest CAS is 40 minutes out. Hold your position." 40 minutes. Reed closed his eyes, counting the remaining ammunition magazines by touch. 18 rounds per mag, 4 mags left. Simple arithmetic that spelled death sentences. That's when they heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist in this corner of forgotten Afghanistan. The distinctive whine of turbofan engines, low and growing closer. Not the distant thunder of an F-16 or the rhythmic chop of helicopters. This was different, deliberate, angry. "Sir," Sergeant Martinez crawled up beside him, pointing skyward. "You seeing this?" Above the smoke and chaos, a single A-10 Thunderbolt II materialized from the heat shimmer, flying so low its landing gear nearly kissed the desert floor. The Warthog, built around a cannon that could punch through tank armor, wasn't supposed to be here. This sector had been cleared of air assets hours ago. The aircraft touched down on a stretch of hardpan that barely qualified as flat ground, engines screaming in reverse thrust. Dust exploded in biblical proportions, creating a wall of brown that swallowed the battlefield whole. For 30 seconds, the world disappeared. When the dust settled, a figure emerged from the cockpit. Small frame, confident stride, flight helmet tucked under one arm. The pilot's name tape read Thorn in black letters, but it was the call sign painted beneath the canopy that made Reed's blood run cold. Ghost Rider. Everyone in theater knew that name. 3 confirmed kills on enemy aircraft, 17 close air support missions without losing a single friendly. But Ghost Rider was supposed to be dead, shot down over Helmand Province 2 months ago. The funeral had been closed casket. Lieutenant Colonel Vivian Thorne dropped from her aircraft's wing, boots hitting Afghan soil with the weight of someone who'd already died once and had nothing left to lose. She surveyed the tactical situation with eyes that had seen too much, calculating angles and distances like a mathematician solving equations written in blood. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the particular calm that comes before violence, "I believe you called for a ride." The Taliban had no idea what was about to hit them. Neither did Reed's men. In 60 seconds, everything they thought they knew about impossible situations was about to change. The first thing anyone noticed about Vivian Thorne wasn't her size, 5'4" in boots, or her gender in a profession dominated by testosterone and ego. It was her eyes. Gray-green like storm clouds, they held the peculiar stillness of someone who'd learned to find peace in chaos. Her hands, small but scarred from countless hours gripping control sticks, moved with the precision of a surgeon as she checked her sidearm. "How many hostiles?" she asked Reed, not bothering with pleasantries or explanations about how she'd apparently risen from the dead. 30, maybe 40, Reed replied, still processing the impossibility of her presence. "Dug in positions, RPGs, and at least 1 heavy machine gun." Thorne nodded, studying the terrain like she was reading sheet music. The A-10 behind her ticked and groaned as its engines cooled, a $20 million war machine that had just performed an impossible landing on ground that would challenge a helicopter. The aircraft's nose arch showed a grinning skull wearing aviator sunglasses, and beneath it, 23 mission markers painted in precise rows. "Radio discipline is about to get interesting," she said, pulling on her helmet. "When I light them up, you move. No hesitation, no questions. Trust the process." Reed wanted to ask how she was alive, where she'd been for 2 months, how she'd known to find them here. Instead, he watched her walk back to her aircraft with the unhurried gait of someone who'd made peace with mortality. She climbed into the cockpit with fluid economy of motion, and within 90 seconds, the Thunderbolt was airborne again. Viper 6, this is Ghost Rider. Her voice came through the radio, clear and professional. I have eyes on 37 military-age males in defensive positions. Recommend you get comfortable. This is going to take a while. The A-10 banked hard left, revealing the aircraft's profile against the Afghanistan sky. Thorne had painted a name on the fuselage that hadn't been there before. Second Chance in flowing script, like a tattoo or a prayer. What happened next would be discussed in military academies for decades. Thorne didn't attack with the overwhelming violence that defined most close air support missions. Instead, she began to hunt. Individual Taliban fighters found themselves isolated from their comrades as 30 cannon rounds landed with surgical precision, cutting communication lines and destroying covered positions one by one. "How is she doing that?" Martinez whispered, watching enemy muzzle flashes disappear in sequence, like someone turning off lights in a house. Reed had no answer. This wasn't standard CAS doctrine. This was artistry disguised as warfare, executed by someone who'd learned to turn killing into something resembling mercy. The Taliban weren't being slaughtered. They were being dismantled, piece by piece, their tactical advantage eroding like sand in an hourglass. Above them, Ghost Rider continued her dance with death, and Reed began to understand why some people came back from the dead. The transformation began with sound. Not the brutal thunder most pilots used when engaging ground targets, but something more surgical. Thorne fired in short, controlled bursts, each one precisely calculated to achieve maximum psychological impact with minimal collateral damage. The Taliban fighters, who moments before had been pressing their attack with confident aggression, suddenly found themselves caught in a nightmare of geometry and physics. "Viper 6, heads up," Ghost Rider's voice came through the radio, calm as someone ordering coffee. "Displacement in 3-2 mark." A 30 round exploded exactly where Reed's team needed to move, sending a cloud of dust and debris that provided perfect concealment. They advanced 20 meters before the next marker round guided their path. It was like being conducted by an invisible orchestra, each explosion a note in a deadly symphony. From his new position, Reed could see the enemy's dilemma unfolding in real time. Every time a Taliban fighter tried to reposition, Thorne anticipated the movement and cut off the route with precise cannon fire. She wasn't trying to kill them all at once. She was hurting them, pushing them into increasingly untenable positions where they had to choose between exposure and retreat. "Sir," Martinez pointed to a cluster of rocks where 3 fighters had taken cover. "They're trying to flank." As if reading his mind, Ghost Rider's voice crackled through. "Visual on the flanking element. Stand by for danger close." The A-10 dove at an angle that defied common sense, so low that Reed could see Thorne's helmet through the canopy. The aircraft's shadow passed over the Taliban position like a promise of doom, and when the cannon opened up, the sound was different. Angrier, more personal. 3 fighters had been there. Now there were only scattered pieces of equipment and silence. "Splash 3, Thorne reported without emotion. "Recommend continued advance on my mark." Reed was beginning to understand the tactical genius at work above them. This wasn't random violence. It was systematic dismantlement of enemy capabilities. Thorne was reading the battlefield like a chess master, seeing moves and countermoves that wouldn't become apparent for several minutes. Every shot forced the Taliban into predictable responses, which she then exploited with the next attack run. The A-10 wheeled around for another pass, and Reed noticed something else. The aircraft's movements had a different quality than other combat pilots he'd worked with, where most CAS flights felt like controlled crashes, barely directed violence. Ghost Rider flew like she was dancing. Each turn precise, each dive calculated to the degree. "How long can she keep this up?" Martinez asked, watching the Thunderbolt line up another attack run. Reed checked his watch. 7 minutes since contact. In that time, Thorne had eliminated 17 enemy positions and created a corridor of advance that had moved them 300 meters closer to safety. No friendly casualties. No collateral damage to nearby structures. It was impossible. It was also happening right in front of them. Above them, Ghost Rider continued her methodical destruction of Taliban capabilities, and Reed began to suspect they were witnessing something that transcended normal military operations. This felt personal. The Taliban commander's name was Hassan al-Kindi, and he'd been fighting Americans for 6 years. He'd survived drone strikes, helicopter gunships, and more close air support missions than he could count. He knew the rhythms of American warfare, the patterns pilots used, the predictable sequences of attack and withdrawal that defined their tactical doctrine. This was different, this was wrong. Through his binoculars, Hassan watched his defensive positions disappear with methodical precision. The American pilot, whoever they were, wasn't following the rules. Standard CAS doctrine called for overwhelming firepower applied in broad sweeps, designed to suppress entire areas. This pilot was hunting individuals, picking apart his force one fighter at a time. How many aircraft? His lieutenant asked through the radio, voice tight with stress. Hassan swept his binoculars across the sky. Only one A-10, flying patterns that seemed impossible for such a large aircraft. The Warthog was built for straight-line attacks, brutal efficiency rather than finesse. This one moved like a falcon, diving and climbing with precision that suggested either exceptional skill or complete insanity. "One," Hassan replied, still not believing it himself. His radio crackled with reports from his scattered team. Mahmoud's position destroyed. Ibrahim's squad forced to retreat. The heavy machine gun emplacement eliminated by a single round placed with surgical precision. 15 men reduced to 8 in less than 10 minutes. Hassan had seen good pilots before. He'd also seen lucky ones. This was neither. This was someone who understood warfare on a level that transcended normal human capability, someone who saw the entire battlefield as a single organism and knew exactly where to apply pressure to make it stop breathing. The A-10 banked overhead again, and Hassan caught a glimpse of markings beneath the cockpit. Mission markers painted in neat rows, too many rows, and beneath them a name painted in flowing script, Second Chance. His blood went cold. He knew that aircraft. 2 months ago, near Helmand Province, his cousin Rashid had been part of an ambush that brought down an American. They'd celebrated for days, passing around cell phone video of the burning wreckage, the scattered pieces of aircraft and pilots spread across 2 kilometers of desert. Rashid was dead now, so were most of the men who'd been with him that day, killed in separate incidents over the following weeks, each death appearing to be coincidence or bad luck. Until now. Hassan keyed his radio with shaking fingers. Fall back. All units fall back now. But Ghost Rider wasn't finished. The A-10 dove again, cannon fire walking across the ground in a line that cut off his men's retreat route. Not random suppression, deliberate herding, forcing them into an area where escape would be impossible. "We surrender," Hassan screamed into his radio, broadcasting on all frequencies. "American pilot, we surrender." The response came through the radio in accented English, a woman's voice carrying the weight of personal judgment. "Surrender was 2 months ago in Helmand Province. This is collection." Hassan closed his eyes and began to pray. Above them, Second Chance lined up for final approach. Reed watched the Taliban fighters emerge from their positions with white flags improvised from torn clothing and prayer rugs. The speed of their surrender had been startling. Professional fighters who'd been pressing their attack minutes before now stumbled into the open with their hands raised, faces showing the peculiar exhaustion that comes from confronting something beyond normal human experience. Ghost Rider's A-10 circled overhead once more before settling into a landing approach on the same impossible stretch of ground she'd used before. Dust billowed again, creating momentary blindness, but when it cleared, Lieutenant Colonel Vivian Thorne was already climbing down from her cockpit. She moved differently now. The controlled calm from before had been replaced by something harder, more focused. Her eyes swept the surrendered fighters with the methodical attention of someone cataloging faces for future reference. "Viper 6, she said to Reed, her voice carrying undertones he couldn't quite identify. "I need 5 minutes with the commander before your people process them." Reed nodded, though something in her tone raised questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. He watched Thorne walk toward Hassan al-Kindi, who knelt in the dust with his hands zip-tied behind his back, staring at her approach with the wide-eyed terror of someone who just realized he was living in a ghost story. The conversation was conducted in Arabic, too quiet for Reed to hear, but he could see Hassan's face drain of color as Thorne spoke. Whatever she was saying seemed to be more than simple interrogation. This felt like judgment being passed, sentence being delivered. After exactly 5 minutes, Thorne walked back to Reed's position. "He'll cooperate fully with your intelligence people," she said. "Won't be any more trouble from his network in this sector." "What did you tell him?" For the first time since landing, Thorne smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "I reminded him about Helmand Province, about his cousin Rashid, about what happens to people who kill Ghost Rider." Reed felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Ma'am, respectfully, you were reported KIA 2 months ago. Closed casket funeral." "I was," Thorne said simply. "Died for about 3 minutes after the crash. Then I got better." She walked back toward her aircraft, leaving Reed to process that impossible statement. Watching her pre-flight routine, checking control surfaces with the same methodical care she'd shown while dismantling the Taliban position, Reed began to understand why her call sign carried such weight in theater. Ghost Rider wasn't just a name, it was a promise. The A-10's engine spooled up again, that distinctive whine building to operational power. Thorne taxied to the end of her improvised runway, turned around, and applied power. The takeoff was as impossible as the landing had been, physics bent to accommodate will and skill in equal measure. "Viper 6, this is Ghost Rider," her voice came through the radio one final time. "Package delivered. Good hunting." The A-10 climbed into the Afghanistan sky and disappeared, leaving behind questions that would follow Reed for the rest of his career. He looked down at Hassan al-Kindi, still kneeling in the dust, and wondered what it meant when dead pilots started keeping promises. 3 weeks later, at Bagram Airfield, Captain Reed sat across from Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison in a debriefing room that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic anxiety. Morrison had been asking the same questions for 2 hours, approaching the incident from different angles like a prosecutor trying to break down an alibi. "Let me understand this correctly," Morrison said, consulting his notes. "An A-10 that was officially destroyed in action performed an impossible landing, engaged 30-plus Taliban fighters with 0 collateral damage, and then disappeared back into unauthorized airspace." "Yes, sir." "Flown by a pilot who was pronounced dead 2 months ago." "Yes, sir." Morrison set down his pen and studied Reed's face with the calculating attention of someone who'd spent 20 years separating truth from wishful thinking. "Captain, you understand how this sounds." Reed did understand. It sounded impossible, delusional, like something that belonged in a bad military thriller rather than an official after-action report. Except for the evidence. 37 Taliban fighters in custody, including Hassan al-Kindi, who provided intelligence that rolled up 2 weapons caches and a bomb-making facility. Physical evidence of 30 cannon strikes that showed precision beyond normal human capability. "Sir, what about the weapon camera footage?" Morrison's expression shifted. That was the detail that transformed Reed's account from impossible story to classified nightmare. Gun camera footage from Thorne's A-10 had been automatically uploaded to theater databases. 17 minutes of high-definition video showing impossible flying and inhuman accuracy. The footage exists, Morrison admitted. It also shouldn't exist because the aircraft that recorded it was destroyed along with its pilot on June 15th. Then how do you explain it? Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying documents that Reed couldn't see. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone sharing information that could end careers. 3 similar incidents have been reported in the past 2 months, Morrison said. An unauthorized, providing close air support in situations where conventional assets were unavailable. Same tail number, same pilot call sign, same impossible performance characteristics. Reed felt pieces clicking into place. She's been doing this for 2 months. Apparently, flying out of an unknown base, using an aircraft that officially doesn't exist, engaging enemy forces with precision that violates several laws of physics. Morrison closed the file. Captain, this conversation never happened. Your after-action report will reflect standard close air support provided by available theater assets. Sir, what about Lieutenant Colonel Thorne? Morrison stood up, straightening his uniform with the careful attention of someone preparing to lie to superiors. There is no Lieutenant Colonel Thorne. Ghost Rider died in Helmand Province on June 15th. End of story. Reed watched Morrison leave, understanding that he'd just been introduced to the kind of classified reality that existed in the spaces between official truth and necessary fiction. Somewhere in Afghanistan, a dead pilot was flying impossible missions in an aircraft that didn't exist. The question wasn't whether it was real. The question was what happened when Ghost Riders decided to come home. Dr. Sarah Chen had been analyzing combat footage for the Defense Intelligence Agency for 8 years, long enough to develop an eye for the impossible. Pilots claimed superhuman accuracy, gun cameras showed impossible angles, and her job was to separate wishful thinking from actionable intelligence. The Ghost Rider footage was different. It was also classified above her clearance level, which meant she wasn't supposed to be seeing it at all. Run the sequence again, she told her assistant, Technical Sergeant Williams, who'd brought her the footage through channels that definitely weren't official. Focus on the targeting solutions. On her screen, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne's A-10 Dove toward a Taliban position with angles that should have resulted in ground impact. Instead, the aircraft pulled out at the last possible second, delivering cannon rounds with precision measured in centimeters rather than meters. Doc, the math doesn't work, Williams said, consulting his calculations. G-forces alone should have rendered the pilot unconscious, and look at this targeting data. Chen studied the numbers. Each cannon burst had been delivered with computer-level precision, accounting for wind, target movement, and ballistics in ways that suggested either exceptional training or something beyond normal human capability. Pull up the pilot's service record, she instructed. Williams hesitated. Ma'am, that's where it gets weird. Lieutenant Colonel Vivian Thorne's file read like a textbook case of excellence in military aviation. Top 5% of her pilot training class, multiple commendations for close air support missions, 0 friendly fire incidents in 4 years of combat operations. The kind of record that led to promotion and teaching assignments. Then came June 15th. Aircraft destroyed by surface-to-air missile near Helmand Province. Pilot body recovered and repatriated. Closed casket funeral attended by her squadron and family. Show me the casualty report, Chen said. The report was thorough, clinical, and definitive. Aircraft wreckage scattered across 2 kilometers. Human remains consistent with high explosive fragmentation. Dental records confirmed identity. No possibility of survival. Doc, Williams said quietly, Dead people don't fly combat missions. Chen stared at the footage, watching Thorne's A-10 perform maneuvers that violated both physics and the factual record of her death. In her 8 years analyzing combat video, she'd never seen anything that couldn't be explained by training, luck, or equipment malfunction. This was different. This suggested capabilities that transcended normal human limitations, precision that bordered on prescient, and most troubling of all, tactical knowledge that seemed to come from somewhere beyond standard military education. "Williams, I need you to do something for me," she said. "Cross-reference any unusual enemy casualties or surrenders in the past 2 months. Focus on Taliban commanders, people who should have known better than to give up without a fight." As Williams worked, Chen continued studying the footage. Something in Thorne's flying patterns reminded her of stories her grandfather had told about World War II pilots, men who'd flown so many missions that they seemed to merge with their aircraft, developing an intuition that kept them alive when skill alone wasn't enough. Except those pilots had been alive when they developed that intuition. Ghost Rider had died first, then started flying. The intelligence Williams gathered painted a picture that raised more questions than it answered. Over the past 2 months, 17 Taliban commanders had either been killed in suspicious circumstances or surrendered after brief engagements with American forces. Each incident involved precision strikes that eliminated key personnel while leaving foot soldiers mostly unharmed. More disturbing were the interrogation reports. Surrendered fighters consistently described encounters with an American pilot who seemed to know their names, their histories, and their personal connections to previous attacks against coalition forces. Several mentioned being told specific details about operations they'd conducted months or years earlier. "It's like she has access to intelligence that doesn't exist in our databases," Williams observed, reading through the reports. "These guys are terrified but not of getting killed. They're afraid of being known." Chen nodded, understanding the distinction. Professional fighters could accept death as an occupational hazard. Being hunted by someone who possessed impossible knowledge about their lives was something else entirely. Her secure phone rang. The caller ID showed only a number she recognized as belonging to someone several levels above her pay grade. "Dr. Chen, this is Colonel Davidson. I understand you've been analyzing some interesting footage." Chen felt her career hanging in the balance. "Sir, I can explain." "No explanation necessary, doctor. We need to talk. My office, 20 minutes." The line went dead, leaving Chen to contemplate the gap between scientific analysis and national security. She'd spent years studying the impossible, but Ghost Rider represented something that challenged not just military doctrine, but fundamental assumptions about life, death, and the spaces between them. 20 minutes later, she sat in Colonel Davidson's office, facing a man whose expression suggested he'd been dealing with impossible situations for longer than he cared to remember. "Doctor, what I'm about to tell you is classified beyond your current level," Davidson began. "But circumstances require expanding your understanding of certain operational realities." Chen waited, knowing that whatever came next would change her relationship with everything she thought she understood about warfare. "Ghost Rider is real," Davidson said simply. "The pilot is dead, the aircraft was destroyed, and the missions are happening anyway. Your job is to figure out how that's possible because, right now, we're operating in territory that our doctrine doesn't cover." Outside Davidson's window, the Afghanistan sky stretched endlessly blue, hiding secrets that challenged the boundary between possible and necessary, between what could be explained and what simply had to be accepted. Somewhere in that sky, a dead pilot was rewriting the rules of engagement one impossible mission at a time. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Taliban intercepts gathered by the National Security Agency. Hidden in routine communications traffic, Intelligence analysts had discovered references to an American pilot who'd been seen in multiple locations simultaneously, engaging different enemy units with identical tactics and precision. Dr. Chen studied the translated transcripts in her temporary office at the Pentagon, trying to extract patterns from what appeared to be systematic impossibility. The intercepts painted a picture of enemy forces that had moved beyond tactical fear into something approaching supernatural dread. "Look at this sequence," she told Colonel Davidson, pointing to communications intercepts from 3 separate Taliban cells. "They're reporting contact with the same aircraft, same pilot call sign, at 14:30 hours near Kandahar, 14:45 hours near Helmand, and 1500 hours near Kabul." Davidson studied the map, calculating distances. "That's impossible. Even with perfect weather and minimal engagement time, no single aircraft could cover that distance." "Unless it's not a single aircraft," Chen said. "Or unless we're dealing with capabilities that transcend normal operational parameters." The implication hung between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. Either multiple A-10s were operating under the same call sign, which violated every protocol in military aviation, or Ghost Rider represented something that existed outside conventional understanding of physics and mortality. Dr. Chen's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Williams. She read it twice before showing Davidson the screen. "Satellite imagery confirms A-10 signatures at all 3 locations during the specified timeframes," she said. "Thermal and radar signatures consistent with a single aircraft." Davidson was quiet for a long moment, studying intelligence reports that challenged his 25 years of military experience. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, what are we dealing with?" Chen had been asking herself the same question for weeks. The evidence pointed toward conclusions that violated fundamental assumptions about reality, death, and the nature of consciousness itself. "Sir, I think Lieutenant Colonel Thorne found a way to continue her mission after death," she said. "I think she's using her knowledge of enemy tactics, combined with capabilities that transcend normal human limitations, to systematically eliminate threats to American forces." "You're talking about a ghost." "I'm talking about someone who died in service to her country and refused to accept that death as the end of her service." Davidson stood up, walking to his window overlooking the Pentagon courtyard. Below them, military personnel moved through their daily routines, handling logistics and planning for conflicts that operated within normal parameters of life and death. "The Joint Chiefs want answers," he said. "Higher than that wants answers. We have a dead pilot flying impossible missions in an aircraft that was officially destroyed, achieving tactical results that exceed anything in our operational history." Chen understood the pressure. Ghost Rider's success rate was unprecedented. 0 friendly casualties, 0 collateral damage, enemy forces neutralized with surgical precision. From a strategic standpoint, she represented the perfect military asset. From a human standpoint, she represented questions that challenged everything they thought they knew about service, sacrifice, and the price of protecting others. "What are your orders, sir?" Davidson turned back from the window, his expression carrying the weight of decisions that would echo through military history. "Find her. Find out how she's doing what she's doing, and figure out whether we're dealing with an asset or a threat that we don't understand." The search for Ghost Rider led Dr. Chen to places that didn't exist on official maps. Using satellite imagery, communications intercepts, and pattern analysis, she'd identified 3 locations where the mysterious appeared to be operating from bases that showed no signs of permanent infrastructure or support personnel. The first location was an abandoned Soviet airstrip near the Pakistani border, concrete runway cracked by decades of weather and neglect. Satellite imagery showed tire marks consistent with A-10 operations, but no evidence of fuel storage, maintenance facilities, or personnel quarters. The second was a stretch of desert hardpan that had never been designated as an airfield, but showed clear signs of repeated aircraft operations. Thermal imaging detected no heat signatures consistent with human activity, yet the runway showed maintenance-level care that suggested regular use. The third location was the most disturbing, the crash site where Lieutenant Colonel Thorne had officially died 2 months earlier. "Show me the comparative imagery," Chen instructed her intelligence team, studying satellite photos of the Helmand Province crash site taken over the past 8 weeks. The progression was subtle but unmistakable. The aircraft wreckage, initially scattered across 2 kilometers of desert, had been gradually reorganized. Pieces that had been separated by the explosion were now positioned in patterns that suggested deliberate arrangement rather than random distribution. More unsettling were the maintenance activities visible in high-resolution imagery. Tools that hadn't been present at the initial crash site, work areas established around major aircraft components, and most impossibly, signs that someone had been systematically rebuilding the destroyed. "Ma'am," Technical Sergeant Williams said quietly, "dead pilots don't perform aircraft maintenance." Chen studied the imagery, watching impossible restoration work progress across weeks of satellite coverage. The wreckage was being reconstructed with precision that suggested intimate familiarity with every system, every component, every detail of A-10 operation and maintenance. "Pull up the maintenance logs from Thorne's service record," she ordered. The records revealed what Chen had begun to suspect. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne hadn't just been an exceptional pilot. She'd been one of the few officers who'd cross-trained in aircraft maintenance, spending off-duty hours working with enlisted personnel to understand every aspect of A-10 operation and repair. "She's rebuilding her aircraft," Chen said, the implications settling like lead in her stomach. "Using knowledge she gained during life to continue her mission after death." The satellite imagery showed the progression continuing. Scattered wreckage becoming organized components being assembled into recognizable aircraft systems. And in the latest imagery, taken just 48 hours earlier, something that looked increasingly like a functional A-10 Thunderbolt II. Williams consulted his calculations. Based on the progression rate, the aircraft should be operational within 2 weeks. Chen understood what that meant. Ghost Rider wasn't just continuing her mission with supernatural abilities. She was creating the means to continue that mission indefinitely. Death had become not an ending, but a transformation that freed her from normal limitations of logistics, command structure, and mortality. "Get Colonel Davidson on the line," Chen said. "We need to accelerate our timeline. If Ghost Rider completes her restoration project, we may be dealing with capabilities that exist completely outside military oversight." Outside the window, the Afghanistan sky stretched endlessly blue, hiding secrets that challenged fundamental assumptions about service, sacrifice, and the price of refusing to abandon the mission. Colonel Davidson's authorization came through encrypted channels at 300 hours. Operation Looking Glass was approved for immediate implementation. Dr. Chen would lead a joint intelligence team to the Helmand Province crash site, with the mission of establishing contact with Ghost Rider and determining whether she represented an asset or a threat to ongoing operations. The helicopter flight to the crash site took 2 hours, crossing terrain that had been contested ground for generations of conflicts. Below them, the Afghanistan landscape stretched in endless variations of brown and khaki, punctuated by villages that looked unchanged since medieval times and military positions that represented humanity's latest attempt to impose order on chaos. Visual contact with the crash site, the pilot announced as they approached coordinates that had been seared into Chen's memory through weeks of satellite analysis. What they found challenged every assumption Chen had developed about Ghost Rider's activities. The crash site had been transformed into something that resembled a military maintenance facility, complete with organized work areas, tool staging, and systematic component restoration. At the center of the organized chaos sat an A-10 Thunderbolt II that appeared fully functional. "Set us down 200 meters out," Chen instructed the pilot. "If she's here, I don't want to surprise her." The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and rotor wash, settling onto ground that showed clear evidence of recent aircraft operations. Chen led her team toward the reconstruction site, noting details that satellite imagery had missed. Hand tools arranged with military precision, aircraft components cleaned and organized according to technical manuals, and maintenance procedures that followed standard operating procedures despite the impossible circumstances. "Hello, Dr. Chen," a woman's voice said from behind them. Chen turned to find Lieutenant Colonel Vivian Thorne standing beside her rebuilt, wearing a flight suit that showed no signs of the explosion that had officially killed her 2 months earlier. She looked exactly like her service photographs, except for her eyes, which held the particular depth that comes from experiencing death and choosing to return. "Colonel Thorne," Chen said, surprised by how normal her voice sounded, "we need to talk." Thorne nodded, gesturing toward a makeshift operations area she'd established using aircraft components as furniture. "I've been expecting you. Actually, I've been expecting someone like you for weeks." They sat across from each other on ammunition crates, two women separated by the fundamental divide between life and death, discussing operational parameters that existed outside normal military doctrine. "The question you're here to ask," Thorne said, "is whether I'm still following orders or whether I've become something else entirely." Chen studied Thorne's face, looking for signs of whatever process had brought her back from official death. "What's the answer?" Thorne smiled, an expression that carried warmth despite the impossible circumstances. "Doctor, I've been dead for 2 months. In that time, I've flown 17 missions, eliminated 43 enemy combatants, and saved the lives of 62 American service members. My kill ratio is perfect, my collateral damage is 0, and my mission success rate is 100%. She gestured toward her rebuilt aircraft, gleaming in the Afghanistan sun like a promise of controlled violence. "The question isn't whether I'm following orders. The question is whether the living are ready to accept help from the dead." Dr. Chen spent 3 hours interviewing Lieutenant Colonel Thorne, trying to understand the transition between death and continued service. What emerged was a story that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, duty, and the price of refusing to abandon the mission. "The crash happened exactly as reported," Thorne explained, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone describing events that had happened to someone else. "Surface-to-air missile, direct hit, aircraft destroyed. I remember the impact, the explosion, and then nothing." "What brought you back?" Thorne was quiet for a moment, staring at her rebuilt A-10 with the expression of someone contemplating miracles that existed outside normal understanding. 3 minutes after the crash, while medics were attempting resuscitation, I became aware of Taliban forces moving to attack a convoy 30 kilometers away. I could see the ambush developing, could calculate the tactical solutions needed to prevent American casualties. Chen made notes, trying to document impossible experiences with scientific precision. "You maintained tactical awareness while clinically dead." "More than that, I could see the entire theater of operations as a single organism, understanding enemy movements, friendly positions, and tactical relationships that aren't visible from normal human perspective." Thorne's eyes held the particular intensity that comes from accessing knowledge beyond normal limitations. Death removed the restrictions that prevent complete tactical understanding. The implications were staggering. If Thorne retained access to comprehensive battlefield awareness after death, she represented intelligence capabilities that exceeded anything in the